Hello everyone, a very good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Pangeran Syafadzillah Pangeran Omorali, or Shai Omorali, and I am a technologist specializing in education from Brunei Darussalam. You can find out more about me from my website or my LinkedIn profile below. Now I'm here to present to you my research paper entitled Considerations of Game Dynamics and Mechanics in College Students' Use of Mobile Games for Learning. So basically, today our focus will be on mobile games. Alright, before we start, I would also like to share that I'm a mobile app developer and I've developed several apps, mostly for educational purposes. Now, I have not become a millionaire out of it yet, mainly because my apps are oftentimes free. But I'm always fascinated by how the simplest of mobile apps can make someone earn a lot of money. So I would like to share a story here. 2 years ago, my 10-year-old daughter and I came up with an idea for an educational game app. We wanted to call it Single Stroke because the dynamics of the game was to solve puzzles by retracing a drawing in the form of a geometrical pattern that were given in each stage with just a single stroke of your finger on the mobile screen. Of course, the rule is that you cannot draw over an already covered part of the pattern. And in order to proceed to the next stage, you must first solve the current stage that you're in. Those are the game mechanics. So my daughter and I spent weeks drafting patterns on pieces of paper, like the ones shown here, because we wanted to have hundreds of stages so players remain committed to the game. And it's about ranking up in the global leaderboard that we will be developing together. But one day my daughter ran to me with her mobile device and said, "Dad, look." It was a game called Two Dots. We found out that our idea wasn't that novel after all. My point for sharing this story here is that I and a 10-year-old had an idea of a game, a simple game. Someone else from some other part of the world made it a reality, a simple game. But it already attracted 9 million players. 9 million players. So it is evident that there is a big audience for digital games, even simple ones. So let's quickly go through the facts about digital games. We know that there is a comprehensively documented timeline on the evolution of games from Space Wars in the 1960s to the age of electronic arcade games, video console games, handheld games, and now being the most popular, the convergence of mobile phones and digital games as mobile phone games. And we also have mixed reality and augmented reality games. We know that it took digital games 2 to 3 decades before they became commercially available and financially viable to families. We had the Ataris, the Casio handhelds, the Nintendo systems, the Sega systems, the Xboxes, the PlayStations, each with their own evolutions and iterations that we know of today. And virtual reality headsets are now affordable, with the Oculus Quest going for around €400. And we have smartphones with an absolute abundance of games. In the Apple Store alone, there are more than 800,000 games. That's mind-blowing. 800,000 games. Most importantly, we know that there is a very active part of educational research on games in education. We have research on educational games, on digital gamification, and digital games-based learning, or DGBL. And this includes my research that I'm presenting today. Now, my research has two main objectives. The first objective is that it is part of my ongoing research project in figuring out the future of digital games in education. I've done several papers in the past on the future of education and games, and 2 such papers dedicated to the subject are as follows. The second objective is to unravel the perceptions that different students have towards various game dynamics and game mechanics. In other words, to be able to match learners with different profiles to mobile digital game formats that they would be more invested in. Not just for their entertainment purposes, but also for the educational purposes. Because another one of my research project in identifying the learner's profiles based on their dispositions towards using technologies. And I've done several papers on these other research areas as well. Alright, for us to research on the use of digital games in education, it is not enough to deep dive into it as an educator or an academic researcher or even a psychologist. We also need to understand how games work from a technology developer perspective or from a games designer perspective. Research on digital games in education has to be multidisciplinary so we get the whole picture. It's not enough to shoehorn our education research theories to understand games design. We need to understand a game's dynamics and a game's mechanics. So we start. We already know that games have a massive audience. We can safely assume that the new generation of teachers now themselves grew up playing digital games. Candy Crush, Scribblenauts, Pokemon Go. I've been a teacher for almost 20 years now, and even I indulge in mobile games once in a while. Teachers now are more open to be trained or to use games for education because we know that students love digital games too. And we are aware that DGBL is a fast-growing body of literature coming from multiple disciplines, not just general education. From engineering to health and even military training. Though they might call it simulation, the kids nowadays call it PUBG, or Players Unknown Battlegrounds, or Call of Duty. And we should be aware that games have dynamics and mechanics to enable them to provide a gaming experience that tests the player's resolve, the player's cognition, the player's intelligence, the player's competitiveness, the player's willingness to take risks, take chances, make educational guesses, mental decisions, making to survive, to prevail, and to overcome adversities. Now, these are the elements that would also be of benefit in education. Game dynamics and game mechanics should therefore be given a lot of consideration as they have the potential to introduce to the learning environments elements that are difficult to achieve using traditional learning and teaching environments alone. Now, would going through a lesson unit on how to run an agricultural farm be more exhilarating than a digital game that pesters you whenever your carrots are being eaten by rodents, while you are running out of turnips to sell, your workers are disgruntled, and you need to clear more land for your livestock? Which one is more real world? A lesson unit or a digital game that offers that? That's what game dynamics and game mechanics bring to the learning process. Games designers regard them as the main constituents of good games, and this design model has been referred to by many researchers. We have the constituent called game elements, which identify the features that keep players engaged, or at the extreme end, addicted. Game addiction comes from game elements. Some players are drawn by the storyline, some others being able to have teamwork with people from the other side of the world. Some others like to be risk takers, and some others like taking chances. So these are what we would call game elements. Next, we have the game dynamics, which refers to the means or the way by which players achieve the goal of the game. For a farming game, for example, the goal is to build a successful farm. In the game dynamics, to do that is to constantly maintain the farm by making smart decisions to prevent chaos. For a world creation game, the goal is to establish a successful civilization, and the dynamics to do that is to strategize in collecting, mining, hunting, scavenging resources to keep up with the cycles of human revolutions and even to the point of industrial revolutions. For a car racing game, the goal is the finishing line and winning, and the game dynamics is to modify the car with the right engine, chassis, tires, parts, while keeping in mind the trade-offs of speed, stability, and safety. And then we have the game mechanics, which refers to the rules and gameplay that define how the game is meant to be played. For the farming game, it will be progression of the farm, and rewards from overcoming problems in livestock and produce. For the world creation game, it will be overcoming the progression of time. And for the car racing game, it will be overcoming the obstacles of the racing circuit, of other cars in that game, in that race, of which parts go with one another. Sounds very real world. And in mobile games, in this sense, real world simulation right in our pockets. Different game dynamics and game mechanics, of course, create different game genres. It can also be the other way around. For example, for a game to be more attractive in its genre, it has to have interesting and unique game dynamics and mechanics. Some games, of course, push the boundaries that they become unsuitable for certain audiences, like young children. Regardless, here are just several examples of different game genres. We can go through them again later at the very end of this presentation, but in the list, we have games for 2D and 3D platforms, first-person shooters, fighting games, games that require stealth movements, survival games, battle royale games, games about following rhythms and music, adventure games, Metroidvania games like Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog, sandbox games where you create worlds or items, construction simulation games, life simulation games, vehicle simulation games, battle arena games, real-time strategy games, sports games, casual games that you indulge in whenever there's time to kill, for example while waiting for the bus or the train or that interview, word games mostly from the traditional games that we already know, such as Scrabble, and we have mixed reality games, puzzles. Many people love puzzles. Board games but made digital, such as Monopoly, math education games, language education games, general knowledge games, and other genres that are just impossible to be replicated in real life. Remember, we have more than 800,000 games in the Apple App Store alone, and the Android Store has even more. Combined, we possibly have more than 2 million games. Now, the question for us folks in education is, which of these games are suitable for education? For this research, I conducted a comprehensive systematic review of the existing literature. I first started from the top, reviewing the literature on mobile learning. When mobile phones became more viable, schools began banning them in classrooms and even school premises because they were just considered disruptive and contributed to many unacceptable practices. Back then, we simply could not or did not know how to deal with mobile phones. Eventually, the wall began lifting as mobile phones were found to provide more ubiquitous features, cognitive benefits, and now we have systems to manage devices in school, what we call mobile device management systems and mobile application management systems. Our discourse on mobile learning used to be about its potential, but now we are talking about how to make it better, how to leverage on mobile learning, how to make educational game apps as popular, if not more popular than entertainment game apps, and better yet, how to exploit games that are meant to be for entertainment to be used for education as well. When reviewing the literature on games in education, several studies suggested various benefits. Games create motivating learning environments by reducing anxiety and helping students to express themselves more freely. They promote the development of social skills, such as teamwork, particularly true for games that require a team to even have it run in the first place. They keep students motivated to progress in their learning. Many games have leaderboards or progress bars or achievement unlock tasks that scaffold this progress. One study presented that games can make players more polite. Of course, we can debate this all day, but maybe certain games with certain dynamics that require politeness in communicating with other players do provide this feature. I myself know of games with human admins who kick out or ban players if they are unruly. This game mechanic is derived not from the game, but from the rules set by the game admin themselves. And of course, there are many studies that highlight how games help the development of children's imagination and creativity as part of its game dynamics and mechanics. Of course, the literature review on game mechanics and dynamics would not be complete without actually reviewing on how they contribute to education. For one, games can be used and adapted to teach a wide variety of content and skills. For example, car racing games and sandbox construction games can be useful for engineering. Mechanics and dynamics also offer these 11 affordances. Game mechanics and game dynamics provide virtual platforms for interactive teamwork and collaboration. Introduce elements of healthy competition that requires knowledge to compete. Inculcate the elements of planning and strategizing. Introduces element of chance and how to rely on informed decision making. Present content as interactive designs in game interface settings. Support continuity through pervasive use of underlying themes. Support context through pervasive uses of storylines. Simulate limitation of resources or work with what you have approach. Simulate the elements of higher risk, better rewards. Simulate the elements of scoring and leveling up that are prevalent in the real world, and inculcate the element of rules. So yes, there are many affordances that games bring into education. Many of these enhances already existing learning affordances that we know of. Many of these bring the learning environment from the physical classroom into the students' pockets, accessible anytime and anywhere, and with anyone that one so desires, such as a teacher or schoolmates. The first factor is called risk and rewards. Represented by 3 items, it measures a student's perception towards risk-taking and incentivization. For this factor, and in fact all the other factors in the model, there is no good or bad side to a student's perception because students simply have different profiles, and it is our responsibility as educators to match these learning experiences that best complement your profile. For risk and rewards, some students are extreme risk takers, while others avoid risk at all costs. And then there are those in between these 2 ends of the spectrum with differing levels of preferences. What is important for us educators is to acknowledge that risk and rewards is indicative of a significant factor. The same acknowledgement goes for the other factors. There is no good side or bad side, and different students have preferences at different points of the spectrum. For factor 2, it is called impact of games on learning. Again, some students are of the opinion that games make lessons more interactive and fun, even competitive. Others would say, no, thank you, I'm fine with games that have a subtle impact on my lessons. So you have those kind of learners as well. Factor 3 is sentimentalism of the game. Some games do have sentimental values to them, especially games where students forge relationships through teamwork with people who they might not forge relationships in real life. Because they go on quests together in the game, they are immersed in a fantasy narrative together, experiences that likely they will not have an opportunity to have in real life. But even in one-player mode, students can be sentimental of the game itself, for example, being able to relate more to the fictional characters or the narrative of the storyline. Factor 4 is what we would call aesthetics, or how the game looks like, how the gaming experience is structured, and how there is an underlying theme. Which is why many games have sequels, such as Super Mario or Final Fantasy, and often always those who are drawn to these sequels of the games are those who quickly familiarize with their aesthetics. Again, we also do not forget those who have low preference for aesthetics. So for these students, it is perhaps easier for them to embrace casual and killing time type games, as opposed to those who have preset aesthetics, such as, for example, medieval fantasy settings, or games with real-world representations, such as celebrities and landmarks. Factor 5 is called the development of self, meaning some students would go for games that they believe if they commit to them, if they invest in these games, they get something in return, such as developing real-world skills, creativity, imagination. Games such as sandbox games and simulation games often allow users to create something that only they have created. One example is Minecraft Pocket Edition. Minecraft Pocket Edition did not come with instructions on how to build high-tech gadgets using simple blocks. But we have seen people build working clocks, scientific calculators, a playable guitar, even a working basic computer, all in the Minecraft realm with just a combination of Minecraft blocks. Obviously, these builds would take weeks to complete. So, other students would rather not want development of self, other than, the development of knowledge through trivia games or quizzes. They are fine with that, because simple games can still be effective learning games. Lastly, Factor 6 is simulated real-life factors. Some games require real-life competencies, such as being able to use social skills to achieve something in a game, or the knowledge of problem-solving for games such as Scribblenauts. One real-life element that is abundant in certain games is the element of chance or luck. In the real world, we always talk about creating our own luck or chancing upon a decision. We have these in games as well. Some students will be up for it, while others would not. These are the 6 factors that my research identified. They are by no means concrete and deterministic. They are at this stage indicative and suggestive that these are the game dynamics and mechanics that should be considered as the prominent ones that influence how students would approach using games in learning, and of course how as educators might want to plan for that process. To conclude, game dynamics and game mechanics certainly play influential roles in a student's selection of and preference for specific game types. Also, whether the game is an educational mobile game or an entertainment game that can be used for education, the ability in measuring a student's dispositions towards games, with risk or rewards, games with attractive aesthetics, or games within which sentimental experiences can be encountered, it enables the educator to be more decisive of which game types work best for which student. Thank you for your time, and now I'm opening myself up for questions.